everybody, and welcome to another episode of Spill the Tea Tutor Talks. And today we have got the wonderful Leslie Ann, and we're going to explore the role of parents as partners when working with children with Autism Spectrum Condition, also known as ASC. We're going to talk about the importance of collaboration between tutors and parents, some strategies, and the benefits of a united approach.
Oh, thank you so much, Susie. Firstly, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me on. As you know, I'm a huge fan. I just think it's amazing that we get to talk about this really important and topical subject. So thank you so much for having me on.
So Leslie, to begin, would you like to introduce yourself?
What's up, everyone? It's Leslie Ann here. I'm an autism specialist and family support consultant and mum to 2 girls. My background stems from early childhood and autism, where I have over 12 years experience working in many and different roles within both private and public sector, since obtaining my latest master's degree in special and inclusive education, where I have heavily focused on neurodiversity and specifically autism. I wanted to give a real push in working primarily with the teams around individuals. So that's the parents, families, organizations, and schools. Well, fast forward to December 2023, the Autism Family Godmother was born, Autism Support Services, and it's all about collaboration, encouraging deeper understanding, enhancing quality of knowledge, and empowering our clients.
Started, Leslie, then on our Spill the Tea sesh. I was wondering if I could ask you a little bit about the importance of parental involvement, and specifically what inspired you to focus on the collaboration between parents in supporting children with ASC. And if I can just tag on to that as well, what have you found to be the most significant benefits?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. Well, I think when you're thinking about a holistic approach, collaboration is what comes to mind.
Yeah.
And when we're thinking about individuals, and that's all individuals, but especially our neurodivergent individuals, having parental, support when it comes to the links, collaboration is imperative for development, for progression, and really just making sure that rapport is there and it's actually authentic. So important. So when we're thinking about collaboration, we need to think not only is it about what the parental support looks like, so who's around the child, but also thinking about the team. So not just the tutors, but thinking about any therapist and so on as well. And when it comes to documentation, I always say, Susie, that it can become quite redundant after time.
Yeah.
Written. So therefore, when we're thinking about parental links, that's why it's so important that the liaison is there to ensure that it's up to date, it's meaningful for that child. And so when we're thinking about the benefits, there are so many. But when I'm thinking about consistency around the environment, so ensuring that in the tutoring session and then what goes on at home is consistent. The approach is there. Everyone knows what's going on with that individual. It's very important. It also strengthens advocacy as well for that individual. Knowing that, for example, that their parents have their eyes on them as well, and so on. That's so important. And just to ensure that emotional well-being is also there as well. So many things can change from week to week, from day to day, from session to session, as you can imagine. So that's really important. And all of this will help the child's progression. It's not linear, don't get me wrong, but it means that when the teams around are interested and on board, then they're the catalyst when it comes to meaningful development for individuals.
Oh no, that's such a great answer, Leslie. And I think that's such a good point as well, that it's not linear. I think that's sometimes what people need to really kind of take on board as part of that. And have it written down on a post-it note in front of the notepad for any work that they're doing. 100%. That ties in rather nicely onto my next question, which is about then that effective communication. So for any tutors who are listening today, whether they're relatively new to working with children with ASC or perhaps, you know, they're just wanting to better themselves, what would you recommend to them in terms of communication with parents to ensure that it is productive, to use your term meaningful, which is so key, and also supportive?
Yeah, well, that's really quite meaty, Susie. But it you know, it can look different. There's no one, you know, size fits all. What I would say is start as you mean to go on, and that is to be interested. Just like you are with the individual, do that same kind of thing for, you know, for the parent, carer, or family. It's so important. So try to get to know them. You know, what is going to be their communicative style? It may be emails, it may be catching them at the end of the session, it may be doing pre-learning before the session to model. You know, it's really about that trial and error. You're going to quickly realize that one family isn't the same as the next family, and that's so important. So just treat it just as you will, you know, with your individual. That trial and error needs to come, you know, that needs to come into play, really. When I think about it as well, when we're thinking about communication styles and what can work, it could be, you know, for example, for some families, it is having them on WhatsApp, voice noting them. It could be that you know, we're thinking about having an email trail so you can refer to a Google Doc where you can both have your comments.
Oh, yeah.
So that's really important. Invite them in, having them shadow, you know, your session. Again, it's so imperative that the individual knows that the team around them, you know, has the best interests at heart. And that means by, you know, that trial and error and making sure, you know, you're not just always talking about what's going wrong or what's going right, but making sure that there's a good balance to get them involved, asking them, did anything happen at the weekend? Is there anything that, you know, anything happened in particular in the half term because I saw X? Oh, okay, fine, let's work from there. So just getting them on board, but making sure that, you know, you go in there as you know, start as you mean to go on. So thinking about that communication style is really important.
Oh, it's so fabulous to hear that, Leslie, because I think that is what you've said there, I think is like the little golden key, which would open up, I think perhaps for a lot of tutors, you know, who are listening, who are like, yeah, how do I negotiate this? Or how do I go about it? Because sometimes I think from the tutor's perspective, you can be a bit fearful, but I think, like you say, if you're genuine, meaningful, and literally to echo that fantastic sentence, you know, start as you mean to go on. Yeah, it creates that really nice bridge. And so true that parents are so different, like you say. It's like you really got to shift and shape. But like you say, if you do it with a true heart, to be really cheesy, they'll know it and they accept it.
And I think it's just thinking about, you know, even as tutors, everyone's going to be different, you know, as a professional, we're all different. And it's just that style as well. And knowing that, okay, you know, for example, we all have those times where, for example, it could be quite daunting in being introduced to a new family. You know, there could be loads of differences. There could be cultural differences. There could be environmental differences of where you're going for the session. There could be so many things that you need to consider. So just really strip it right back, think about it, and think just like you would do for the individual. Let me get to know this family.
Yeah, no, so absolutely, Leslie, really, really true. And that really then moves on nicely onto the whole theme of this chat, which is about a united approach. Like we've covered the benefits, communication, you know, ways to go about it in a meaningful way. So I was wondering whether or not you could share some really nice little success stories where that united approach between educators and parents has made that real difference in a child's life and development.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Susie, I mean, I think it really just stems of what we've been talking about. And that is actually, the difference is actually made when there's an interest of being collaborative. And that's what I would say, because there's been times where things have gone wrong, because they will go wrong at times. And I've thought to myself, oh, what's happening here? And typically, usually, commonly, it's around when the communication, there's a breakdown. And we haven't checked in, perhaps we haven't had that meeting, or I haven't been able to model something, and so on. So actually, that's the biggest success, is actually when you have a team around the individual and you do strip it right back and think, actually, let's get together, let's have these conversations. I think that's where you're going to see neurodivergent individuals really thrive, is when they have that real holistic approach in communication style around them, and that all stems from the collaboration of individuals. So I really feel that that is one of the most simple yet effective ways to ensure that the individual feels well supported and everyone's on the same page. And with that being said, sometimes you're not going to be on the same page, hence why chat or writing that email or making sure that you send that voice note is so important, is making sure that everyone remains on the same page. And that really comes from, the way you're collaborating. And that's actually coming together at all points during the journey, really. When it comes to that as well, I really feel that, at times we can forget and be on our own journey of this is the outcomes, these are the this is the targets we want to hit. What I would say is try to put that aside at times. Let's strategize everything, and oftentimes we'll get the best out of a situation when we're thinking about the quality in those sessions, in your tutoring sessions. Just go with what we have in front of us. Again, it may be that mum, dad, grandmother tells us, they've had a really bad day today. And so that, then you think to yourself, oh gosh, let's not actually do what I have planned. And again, that only will come if that communication is there and that holistic approach is there.
Oh, and that is so true. And it is about sort of shifting and shaping. And I think to have it where the caregiver feels that trust to tell you as a tutor, like they have had a bad day or this has happened, but they don't feel shameful about it or that you're going to judge them. I think that's such a major part. And like you say, it's like, oh yeah, no, don't worry. Or if they've not slept or they've had an argument or like today is not their day. Like it's about, no, it's not like ignoring that and saying, no, we're still going to do this activity that I planned. It's like, save that for another day.
And just to your question as well, Susie, there has been so many success stories, and it's wonderful that part of my job, that's what happens. That's so rewarding, and that is, for me, what unlocks change is about people being interested and coming together and having those dialogues and discourse and conversations. But I'll tell you, what I can tell you, I guess, is when I know that it does go wrong. And that's when I'm talking about when perhaps those conversations haven't happened, the discussions haven't been had. There's not that curiosity. No one's interested. They're not noticing. That's when you can see that it's not been successful.
No, so true. And it's then, like you say, you've got to kind of reevaluate. But everything that you're saying, Leslie, I'm sure it's going to hit home for a lot of tutors, because for anyone who's an educator, a parent, anyone in the field that works with young people will know that there's been lots in the news or lots of articles and things about, students with ASC or just SEND or additional needs, and everyone's going, oh, we really need to help. How can we help? And I think that's where tutors can play quite a nice role in that. But then knowing how, and listening to fabulous people like yourself, and for anyone who is listening, do drop Leslie a follow. She's very bubbly, personable, and incredibly clued up on what she's talking about. She is a specialist. You'll get everything from her. Is to learn and to find out, because there are so many young people who, like you say, perhaps if they're in a mainstream setting, through no fault of anyone in particular, it might end up like, no one is taking an interest. So then, like you say, that communication and others coming together to rally around them can make such profound difference.
For sure. I completely agree. And thank you for your kind words. And I think, when it comes to tutors, you've really got such a great opportunity. It's so intimate. And just apply that to your parents as well, that you really build that relationship and that rapport, just because it's just you and them. Like you say, in other environments, of course, there's pros and cons of all, but in other environments, you're maybe working against other factors, whether it's more children, more people, different environments, where typically when it comes to tutoring, there's consistency there. Consistency of environment, let's say, the person that you're going to call at the end of the session, and so on. So really hone into the power of that intimacy and what you can do with it.
Oh yeah, no, definitely so. Because equally, where that young person might be coming to you, or any, like you said before, any specialists that they also work with might be feeling really burnt out or unsure of things. Usually, I would say, and I'm sure that you found this, Leslie, the parents, the caregivers are also pretty burnt out. So they do need someone who's going to be like you say, open, meaningful, and genuine. And so true. So true.
And that's why I say, if you can, there's different mediums, record your sessions if the consent is there, to actually show them what you're working on, what you're talking about, the terminologies you're using, all of that great stuff. So modeling does actually happen, or invite them in, or think about, instead of the session with a young individual, today we're going to have like a drop-in clinic kind of thing. So many different ways. But really what I would say is, that kind of dated idea of therapizing or tutoring, that's just being in a room with that individual and then it's not going anywhere, that's gone, that's redundant. So bring them in, and when we're thinking about the culture of collaboration, that's exactly what it is. Bring them in, strip it right back to that individual and that family, ensure that you're being bespoke and individualized. And really that's by taking, going from their lead, trial and error, seeing come up with. You're not going to get it, right all the time, but ensure that they are a part of that journey. It's so imperative for that young individual, that child, that young individual, their family. And so
oh no, I love that. And there's so many good tips that you've sprinkled throughout this chat, Leslie. The ideas that you've listed, which I think could be real eye-openers for any tutors that are listening. A drop-in clinic is such a good idea. And I think, to embrace and to invite them in. Why not? If they're wanting you to work with their child, that young person. It's so true. And I think sometimes if people are just kind of on one little set of tracks and they're like, I really want to do better and I really want to do better, you've got to kind of change course or else you just still be on that journey.
Again, for a tutor, I feel like that's, that's where you can really hold that space, that you don't really have to follow that traditional path. And actually it can switch it up. You can be more, personal, and especially when we're thinking about our neurodivergent individuals, our autistic individuals, that's where you're really going to see progression, when you really get to know them, tap into their interests and so on. So being a tutor, you've got that ability to be flexible and to ensure that you're being as bespoke as possible, and that is meaningful for all.
Oh, that was wonderful, Leslie. And I suppose now, as we conclude our little spill the tea sesh, is there anything that you'd like tutors, in addition to these fantastic tips and all about collaboration, but something else that you'd like them to maybe think about and, take on board from our little chat today?
Yeah, well, there's so many things. And, as I say, this has been so lovely talking to you about this really important topic. But what I would say is the importance of advocacy. One, we're thinking about the culture of collaboration. One, we're thinking about neurodivergent individuals and, including autistic individuals. It's really about the power of advocacy, and collaboration is about coming together. For that's when we're going to unlock change. There's so many strategies that we can employ. There's so many different approaches that we can encourage. But when it comes to unlocking change, it's actually about being interested, coming together, noticing, being curious. That's when we're going to unlock the change. So yeah, go forward with that and everything will be good.
Oh, thank you, Leslie Ann. And we're going to move on to next, our social media generated question, where lots of people send in and then we choose one. So a lot of our lovely tutors were asking about the same topic. So I think this will help out a lot of our folks here, which is how do you best support and how do you best communicate to parents who are perhaps themselves on a journey to understanding their child's needs? So how do you kind of go about that as a tutor, in a sense if they're not quite,
Yeah, that's such a good one. I think what I would say, my advice for the tutor is to think to yourself, well, let me just give my best shot to this individual. So neurodivergence or not, you just want to give the best care, the best support for that individual. And also understanding that readiness is really important. And it's not just you, and it's not just the individual, but it's for the parent and the families as well. And to be able to obtain a really meaningful, holistic rapport and relationship. Of course, honesty and transparency is really key, but really understanding boundaries as well is really important. So thinking about that readiness. So perhaps, like you say, the parent, the family are, they're not at the journey where they're thinking to be interested in a label. That might not be necessarily. However, making sure that you're, clear of what's happening, telling them what's going on in the sessions, giving them a lot of information, telling them what their strengths are, possibly where their gaps are, and actually just really naturally, but just thinking about, have we ever explored neurodiversity? This may look like this. And for this young person, this is what they're really interested in. This is what they're really good at. But I've also noticed that there are certain gaps here as well. When we're thinking about gaps, I'm not talking about, anything in a negative way, but things to explore. Those are the gaps I'm talking about, that middle gray area. So it may be that they are better suited with, for example, a different seating position that they actually learn really well standing up. Have we ever explored that? When we start talking like that to our parents and our families, then that can naturally lead to other conversations. Whereas when we don't talk to them about it, it can be really a shock, a surprise. Yeah. And oftentimes that's where we might see that they're pulling on the brakes and, for example, that they're talking about those labels. Yeah. What I would say is, autism or not, it's just good practice to ensure that you're really looking at that individual and meeting their need, whatever that looks like. And so having those conversations with the parents are really important. I hope that helps.
Oh no, I'm sure it will, Leslie. And that's just phrased so perfectly. I know people be writing it down like, this is what I need to say, this is how I need to go about it, which is it's just sometimes what you need, and especially from a specialist like yourself who's very kindly spilled the tea with us, and that concludes the Spill the Tea sesh. So thank you so much, Leslie. It's been an absolute joy to have you with us today, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh gosh, I have, Susie. Thank you so much. I'm so excited that not only have we done this, but we've got other work together. And so thank you so much for having me on Spill the Tea. I've had so much fun. Thank you kindly.
Oh, thank you. And stay tuned, everybody, and make sure to check out, if you wish to, our previous live with the wonderful Leslie, which is on our Twinkl Tutor page, or on Leslie's page, which we will be tagging in, so you can give her a lovely follow. And our roadmaps to success, which have already had 2 that have come out with some really good tips, and we'll have another one coming out soon, so stay tuned.